explaining the concept of federalism. Federalism is a type of government in which the power is divided between the national government and other governmental units. Federalism system is a system whereby there will be a division of power between the federal government, state government and local government, and each of them have their own power. Three of these governments adopt the principle of separation powers into three, which are executive, legislative and judiciary. Malaysia is a federal constitutional monarchy. It has a parliamentary system of government headed by a prime minister. In a federal constitution, the powers of the government are divided between a government of the whole country and the government of parts of the country in such a way that each of the governments is legally independent. The government for the whole country has its own area of powers, and it exercises them without any control from the governments of the constituent parts of the country, and the constituent governments exercise their power without any control of the central government. The federal government consists of a legislative body that has a lower house, which is House of Representatives, and upper house, which is House of Senate. There is also an executive body, which is led by a cabinet. Next, there is the judiciary, which functions to interpret law, solve the conflict, and to maintain justice. Meanwhile, the state government is empowered to legislate on matters such as land matters, public works, local government, agriculture and forestry, Islamic law, and public holidays. Next, the local government, which has been given the authority by the federal government to construct, operate and maintain economic, social and environmental infrastructure, and so much more.
Next, there are so many strengths and weaknesses in federalism in Malaysia. Some of the strengths are: number 1, separate government. In a federal form of government, both the center and the units have their separate set of governmental apparatus. As there are federal government, state government and local government, there would not be redundancy of work, so that everything will run smoothly and abuse of power can be avoided. Number 2, there will be a better understanding of local issues and demands. The central government has no true way to understand what issues, demands, and changes need to be made in every area of the country. This is why federalism is such a great advantage. The smaller branches of the local governments are right in the middle of the local society. They are better suited to deal with the true things that need to be changed. For example, providing amenities, recreational parks, housing, and commercial activities. These kinds of concerns can only be taken in action because there is state and local government. Federal government alone can satisfy and understand the local issues. The weaknesses are coming number 1, inequalities between states. The federal form of government allows for regional inequalities between different states. For example, instead of education funding throughout the country being the same, since it is a state issue, some states will spend more per capita on education than other states, causing what could be considered a disparity. The same goes for other things as well, such as taxes, healthcare programs, and welfare programs, which increase regional inequality amongst the different states. Next, for the number 2, a lack of accountability. With the responsibility of the government being shared, it becomes very easy for one sector to release responsibility for the other, and vice versa. This can become a very large problem because if something goes wrong, both sides of the government can relinquish control for the responsibility.
The issue regarding federalism in Malaysia. The first issue is regarding expenditures and taxation. The Constitution specifies the areas of federal, state and joint responsibility for expenditures and taxation. State responsibilities are limited. It was argued that this arrived from two basic principles. First, it was argued that the federal government need control of the major sources of revenue to equalize the level of wealth among the states. It was argued that only if the federal government had the main taxation, powers could income be redistributed from rich to poor state. Second, it was argued that the principle of financial responsibility implied that responsibility for raising and spending money should rest with the same authority. This in turn means that if the province were to have limited taxing power, they must also have limited expenditure responsibilities. Despite the idea that the principle of financial responsibility is satisfying, it is clear that state tax revenue are insufficient to meet expenditure needs, and several categories of the federal state grants are necessary. Expenditure responsibilities are as specific in the ninth schedule of the Constitutions. List 1 detail areas that fall under federal jurisdiction. List 2 state jurisdiction, and List 3 concurrent jurisdiction. A complete list of these responsibilities is provided as Appendix A. Important federal responsibilities are defense and security, foreign affairs, education, social security, trade and industry, communication and health. State government are responsible for local government matters relating to Islamic religion and Malay custom, land and mines and water supplies. Finally, the concurrent list includes public health and sanitation, drainage and irrigation and social welfare. There are special provisions extending the state power of Sabah and Sarawak in both lists 2nd and 3rd, which can be seen in Appendix A. Article 110 of the Constitution delineates the sources of revenue available to the state governments. Part 3 of the 10th Schedule enumerates in detail these taxes, fees, and other sources of revenue. These are listed in Appendix B. Part 4 of the 10th Schedule lists those additional revenue sources assigned to Sabah and Sarawak. These are also listed in Appendix B. Article 109 enriched two sets of federal to state grants, the capitation grant and the state road grants, and also make provision for the possibilities of other grants being introduced. This provision has allowed for example, the revenue growth grants and grants to local government. The Constitution thus explicitly recognized that there was fiscal gap between the expenditure responsibilities and the taxing power of the state.
The solutions. Powers of taxation are mainly in the hands of the federal government. The constitutions lay out explicitly those tax powers available to the state, leaving the residual to the central government. In addition to taxation powers, the Constitution also enshrines two types of federal to state transfer, as well as allowing for emergency funds. States also have other sources of revenue beyond taxes and grants, such as the return from state-owned enterprise. Conclusions. Number 1. There are several levels of government, and the formations of governments depends on the system being practiced. Number 2. Government administrative machinery assists the government in policy implementation, and it is an important part of government. Number 3. Government machinery given the powers to implement the government policies. Number 4. The powers of government and its machinery are subject to the constitutions and law. Number 5. Federalism in Malaysia is a unique system of administration divided into federal, state, and local governments.